Hello, everyone. I hope you're having an amazing day. Today, we're diving into a beautiful Tet story about James and Tu Diep walking through a vibrant Vietnamese flower market in 2026, where they didn't just buy flowers, but made a quiet promise that could change everything between them. What really happened at the end of that flower-lined street? Stay with me to find out. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our upcoming videos. The afternoon air of early 2026 carried that unmistakable feeling of Tet, something between nostalgia and excitement, like the whole city was quietly holding its breath before the new year arrived. The flower market stretched along a long road, both sides lined with vibrant stalls packed tightly together. Pink peach blossoms, golden apricot trees, round chrysanthemums, kumquat trees heavy with fruit. Color spilled into the street like a living painting. James slowed his steps as he and Tu Diep entered the road. "Wow," he said softly, turning his head from left to right. "This is incredible. I've never seen anything like this." Tu Diep smiled. She was wearing a simple pastel ao dye, the fabric flowing gently as she walked. Her hair rested neatly over her shoulder, and for a moment, she looked like she belonged perfectly to the season, like spring itself had taken human form. "This is just one street?" she teased. "You should see the markets closer to midnight." Around them, vendors called out cheerful greetings. Motorbikes rolled slowly between crowds. Families stopped to take photos. Children pointed at trees taller than they were. The entire road felt alive. James leaned closer. "So tell me," he said, "what's the difference between these?" He gestured toward a bright yellow apricot tree and a cluster of pink peach blossoms. Tu Diep stepped toward the apricot blossoms first. "In the South, people decorate with hoa mai, these yellow flowers. They symbolize prosperity and luck." Then she moved to the peach blossoms. "In the North, hoa jiao is more common. It represents renewal and protection." James nodded, absorbing every word. "So, whichever flower you choose, it's like choosing what you want for the new year?" "In a way, yes," she said. But it's also tradition, family, memory." They walked deeper into the market, their pace unhurried. The flowers on both sides formed a colorful corridor, almost like nature had created a festival just for them. At one point, their hands brushed lightly. Neither of them pulled away immediately. James cleared his throat softly, pretending to examine a pot of chrysanthemums. Tu Diep hid her smile. "Careful," she said playfully. "If you keep staring like that, people will know you're not from here." "I'm just trying to look like I understand everything," he replied. "I don't want to embarrass you." She stopped walking and turned to him. "You could never embarrass me." The noise of the market faded slightly in that moment. For a second, it felt like the two of them were standing in the center of something much bigger than a street full of flowers. They continued walking until they stopped in front of a large apricot tree. Its branches stretched wide, blossoms glowing softly against the busy background. Tu Diep stared at it longer than the others. James noticed. "What are you thinking about?" he asked gently. She took a slow breath. "I was just thinking, I hope 2026 is quieter." "Quieter?" "Last year was, complicated." She didn't elaborate, but she didn't need to. "I just want peace. For my family. For us." James looked at the blossoms, then back at her. "I want that too," he said. "But I also want something more." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh? I want us to build something stable this year, not just survive things, not just react to problems. I want clarity, direction, no misunderstandings." He hesitated before adding, "No distance." A small breeze passed through, shaking the branches. A few yellow petals drifted down, one landing gently in her hair. James reached up instinctively and brushed it away. His fingers lingered just a little longer than necessary. "You have something here," he said quietly. Tu Diep didn't move. Her voice softened. "Thank you." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Around them, people laughed, bargained, posed for photos. But within their small space, everything felt still. Eventually, she broke the silence with a light smile. "Come on, we still need to actually buy something." They walked to a smaller stall run by an elderly woman. Her face was lined with years of experience, but her smile was bright. "Two young people looking for flowers," the vendor said warmly. "Buy something lucky for the new year." Tu Diep crouched slightly to inspect a pot of round chrysanthemums. Cute mum joy. The flowers were tightly clustered, golden and full. "These are beautiful," she murmured. James leaned down beside her. "Are these lucky too?" "Yes. They symbolize fullness and harmony." "Then we should definitely get them," he said decisively. The vendor named a price. James blinked. Tu Diep glanced at him mischievously. "You can try bargaining." "I can," he whispered. She nodded. "It's part of the experience." James straightened up and attempted his most confident tone. "Could you maybe give us a better price for the new year?" The elderly woman laughed immediately. "You're not from here, are you?" He grinned. "Is it that obvious?" "Very." She looked at Tu Diep. "He's trying hard, though." After a bit of playful negotiation, she lowered the price slightly. James looked triumphantly at Tu Diep. "See, I'm learning," she laughed, a clear, bright sound that blended perfectly with the atmosphere of the market. "You're improving." James lifted the pot of chrysanthemums. It was heavier than he expected. "Why is this so heavy?" he muttered dramatically. "Because luck isn't light," she teased. He pretended to struggle. "If this is what prosperity feels like, I need to go to the gym more." The vendor shook her head, smiling. "You two look good together. May your new year be full." Tu Diep's expression softened at those words. She paid, thanked the woman politely, and together they stepped back into the moving crowd. The street felt even busier now. Motorbikes edged forward slowly. Families squeezed past. The sound of laughter and bargaining grew louder as evening approached. Suddenly, a small surge of people pressed forward from behind. Instinctively, James reached out and grabbed Tu Diep's hand firmly. "Stay close," he said. She looked down at their intertwined fingers, surprised. But she didn't pull away. "I wasn't going anywhere," she replied softly. Still, she tightened her grip slightly. They moved forward together, navigating the crowd carefully. From above, if someone were watching, they would see two small figures walking side by side down a long, colorful road framed by blossoms on both ends. A moving picture of youth, hope, and something unspoken growing between them. James glanced at her profile as they walked. "You know," he said quietly, "I think this is my favorite part of 2026 so far." She turned to him. "It's only the beginning." He smiled. "Exactly." They continued toward the end of the flower street, the pot of chrysanthemums resting between them like a small symbol of something new taking root. And neither of them realized that this simple walk through a Tet flower market would become a memory they'd carry far beyond the season itself. By the time they reached the far end of the flower market, the sky had softened into that gentle shade between afternoon and evening. The noise behind them still buzzed with life. Vendors calling out last-minute deals, children tugging at their parents' sleeves, the distant hum of motorbikes weaving carefully through the crowd. But here, near the quieter stretch of the road, everything felt calmer. James shifted the pot of chrysanthemums in his arms. "Okay," he exhaled, half laughing. "I officially respect anyone who carries these every year." Tu Diep smiled at him. "You wanted prosperity and harmony. This is part of the deal." "I didn't realize prosperity came with Arm Day," he replied. She stepped closer and adjusted the pot slightly so he could hold it more comfortably. Their fingers brushed again, and this time neither pretended it was accidental. They stood side by side, turning to look back down the long flower street. From where they were, the two rows of blossoms seemed to stretch endlessly, glowing with color. Pink and yellow blurred together in a soft wave of spring. It's beautiful from here, James said quietly. It always is, Tu Diep answered, but every year it feels a little different. How so? She took a moment before replying. Because every year, you're not the same person who walked here before. Your worries change, your dreams change. Sometimes the people beside you change too. He glanced at her. And this year? This year, she hesitated, then smiled gently. I'm grateful for who's beside me. The simplicity of her words hit him harder than any dramatic confession could have. He set the flower pot down carefully on the pavement beside them. For a second, he looked almost nervous. Then he met her eyes. Tu Diep, he began, his voice softer than before. In 2026, I don't just want peace. I don't just want stability. He paused, searching for the right words. I want to be more intentional about everything, about work, about family, about us. She didn't interrupt. I don't want another year where we let misunderstandings grow, he continued. If something feels wrong, we talk. If something feels uncertain, we face it together. I don't want distance to creep in quietly. Her expression changed. Not dramatic, not tearful, but thoughtful. Like she was measuring his words carefully. And if things get difficult, she asked softly. Then we don't let go just because it's hard, he replied without hesitation. We hold on tighter. The faintest smile touched her lips. That sounds very confident. I'm serious. I know. For a moment, neither spoke. The last light of the day caught the petals behind them, making the blossoms seem almost luminous. Finally, she said, Then let's make a deal. He raised an eyebrow. A deal? Yes. In 2026, we choose clarity. We choose honesty. No assumptions. No silence when something matters. He extended his hand slightly, playful but sincere. Deal. She placed her hand in his. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks, no grand gestures. Just two people standing at the end of a flower-lined street, quietly deciding to do better than they had before. James picked up the chrysanthemums again. All right, he said, his tone lighter now. Let's take our symbol of harmony home. They walked away from the market together, leaving behind the brightest part of the street and entering the quieter residential area nearby. The sounds of celebration softened into distant echoes. As they reached her house, the familiar gate creaked open. The courtyard felt peaceful, almost like a small world separated from the busy road they had just left. Set it here, she said, pointing to a spot near the entrance. James carefully placed the pot down. Tu Diep crouched slightly to adjust the flowers, turning the fullest side outward. There, she murmured. Now it looks right. He watched her from a few steps away, the way she focused, the way she smoothed a single leaf back into place. It felt strangely intimate, like he was seeing a future in small, ordinary moments. You know, he said, leaning lightly against the wall, when I first came to the market today, I thought it was just about flowers. She glanced at him. And now? Now I think it's about choosing how you want to begin. She stood up slowly. That's exactly what it's about. They both stepped back to admire the chrysanthemums by the door. The round golden blooms seemed to glow softly in the fading light. Ted isn't just decoration, she continued. It's resetting your heart, letting go of what was heavy, deciding what you want to carry forward. James nodded. Then I'm carrying this. She looked confused. The flowers? He shook his head. You. The words hung gently in the air. Her breath caught just slightly, not in shock, but in recognition. James, I don't mean it in some dramatic way, he added quickly, almost shy. I just mean, I want you beside me, not just at markets, not just on good days, in everything. She stepped closer to him now, closing the small distance between them. Then don't just say it, she replied softly. Show it, He smiled, relieved. "I will." A breeze moved through the courtyard, stirring the petals of the chrysanthemums. Somewhere in the distance, someone tested early fireworks, small pops echoing faintly in the evening air. They stood quietly for a moment, looking at the flowers together. "It's funny," James said. "We walked through a whole street of color, and this small pot is what we brought home." "Because it's enough," she answered. "You don't need to take everything, just the part that feels right." He looked at her with a mixture of admiration and something deeper. "You always know how to say things like that." She shrugged lightly. "Maybe I just think too much." "No," he said gently. "You think carefully." The sky darkened slowly, signaling that the day was ending and the new year was close. The house felt warmer somehow, not because anything had changed physically, but because something between them had shifted. Before stepping inside, James turned back toward the street they had come from. He imagined the rows of peach blossoms and apricot trees still glowing under streetlights, families still choosing flowers, couples still bargaining and laughing. "Next year," he said, almost to himself, "I want to come back here again." "With heavier flowers?" she teased. "With stronger arms," he replied. She laughed quietly, then reached for his hand, not because the crowd might push them apart, not because she was afraid of getting lost, but simply because she wanted to. He intertwined his fingers with hers. As they walked into the house together, the chrysanthemums stood at the entrance like a quiet promise. In the colors of spring 2026, they hadn't just bought flowers. They had chosen clarity. They had chosen closeness. They had chosen to step into the new year side by side. And sometimes that's all a beginning needs. In the vibrant atmosphere of a traditional Vietnamese Tet flower market in 2026, James and Tu Diep walked side by side down a long street lined with peach blossoms, apricot trees, chrysanthemums, and kumquat plants. As James admires the colors and traditions for the first time, Tu Diep gently explains the cultural meanings behind each flower. What begins as a simple stroll slowly turns into something deeper. They share their hopes for a calmer, more intentional new year and confront the quiet distance that once stood between them. After playfully bargaining for a pot of chrysanthemums, they carry it home together, symbolizing harmony and a fresh start. At the end of the day, they realize that Tet is not just about decoration, it's about choosing clarity, connection, and walking into 2026 side by side.